Newly released documents show a helicopter company contracted to drop 1080 in Fiordland accidentally dropped the toxin on takeoff when one of its buckets was left open. Our Otago Southland reporter Lydia Anderson told me the accidental drop happened during a 1080 operation near Te Ano in September.
As part of that same drop operation, Doc have actually detailed to us an incident that happened in the helicopter's loading zone. So on September the 21st, one of the contracted helicopters took off from the loading zone, but it had an open bait bucket at the time, and this allowed bait to drop onto the ground throughout the loading zone into a nearby paddock and to some nearby scrubland. And the reason for that was they'd been under a lot of pressure, there'd been a lot of fog, they'd been trying to carry out this operation in a rush, and they'd preloaded the bait into their buckets before they took off. At the same time, a switch had sort of coincidentally been activated on board the chopper. They're not sure how or why, and this allowed the bait to drop through the buckets onto the ground.
So how did this differ from normal practice? What happened here, other than obviously the fact it was able to happen that was different from what would normally happen?
So because of that bad weather and because they'd been in a rush and they'd preloaded their buckets, that was what differed from their normal practice. Usually you have to start the helicopter up, undertake all these system checks and then load the buckets. So Doc have said that this was a pilot error. If they'd just gone through those normal procedures, this never would have occurred.
Right. What did Doc say about this? What has Doc said about this?
So at the time, on that day when it occurred, Doc said they were immediately aware. They started cleaning up the area, running around, picking up all these pallets. And they also, as part of their incident report, they've issued a series of recommendations to this helicopter company. And those include that they need to ensure that they comply with their standard procedures. So they need to make sure they don't load any bait into the buckets until the helicopter's been started up. They also need to undertake some full system checks at the start of work and after any breaks throughout the day. You know, if the helicopter's stopping and they're going out again, they need to do a full system check again. And they also said they need to be really careful not to rush their operations. You know, if there's bad weather or something that's hampering them, don't rush it. You know, take your time and don't make these mistakes.
Yeah. It sounds like the wisdom of hindsight, but it's good they've learned from this. What are locals saying about this?
So we actually talked to a local resident earlier today who's been following this really closely and investigating it himself. And he said he went out there that day. Apparently on the day there were protesters out there, you know, who watched this helicopter take off with bait falling from the bucket. And so this local, he went out there and to the public land next to the loading zone and picked up pallets. And he says it's public land. He notified Doc, and he said Doc didn't do a good clean-up job on that day. There were pallets everywhere. He said they went out again. It took them about 7 or 8 days to actually clean up these pallets. So it wasn't an immediate response, he says. Now, we did go to the helicopter company for a response on this issue. They did not want to respond. They said they've had threats made to their staff. They're very uncomfortable responding to this. They're very worried about the safety of their staff. But we do have a letter from them that was given to Doc at the time. And it said, you know, the switch that had been activated when they don't know how it was activated, but sometime while the helicopter was on the ground, the switch had been moved into position that allowed the bait to fall to the ground when they took off. They said no buckets will be loaded in advance in future or before pre-flight testing has been completed. They have apologised to Doc and they're confident that they've got systems in place to eliminate these issues.
Lydia Anderson.